Well, it's time for our paper review. Joining us this morning is Vincent Moss, who's former political editor at the Sunday Mirror. Good morning.
Morning, David.
How are you?
Very well, thanks.
Very nice to see you.
Great to see you too. And I've made no apologies really for starting on this A&E story because I think looking at the Sunday papers, it is the big story of the morning. The Sunday Telegraph is leading on it. Thousands in a 12-hour A&E wait every day. Now, there are fears, according to the Royal College of Emergency Medicine and Dr. Adrian Boyle there, he's very worried about that situation, saying that 2,000 deaths a month could now be happening because of this. And the data shows that compared to in the last year, almost 1 million people have endured a wait of at least 12 hours, 3 times higher than 3 years earlier. And for all the reasons you've talked about, sort of problems with GP surgeries, problems with the social care system and not being able to discharge people, I think it's now going to become the norm, unfortunately, for very many people, that a 12-hour wait will be the minimum. And of course, we've not really hit the real winter crisis and the cold weather.
No, we haven't. And let's just focus on that figure. 2,000 deaths a month because of the failures of A&E.
I mean, it would be good to know where that figure's coming from, wouldn't it?
It would.
To see how it's broken down.
But then you and I know if you go in with cardiac pain, for example, and you sit on a trolley, I mean, hopefully someone intervenes before that, but if you're on a trolley for 12 hours, that's not actually going to help your prognosis, is it?
No, and we know that people with strokes and, coronary artery spasms, etc., have a window of opportunity to treat them. So, with a stroke, it's 4 hours, and we've got people not getting an ambulance for 10.
I mean,
so their window of treatment.
I mean, I was always taught the golden hour, literally with a stroke. 4 hours, fine, but 1 hour would be even better.
So, yes, of course, but the target to thrombolysis is 4 hours, and that's where the evidence is that it makes all the difference. And we've seen already one young man, 54, I think, die because he didn't get that window for stroke.
It's a real problem, isn't it? I mean, I live luckily between St George's Hospital in London and St Thomas's Hospital in London, and I think if I had that kind of symptoms, you would want to get to those hospitals as quickly as possible and get seen as quickly as possible, because even people like me who don't know much about medicine do know, as you're talking about, that first hour is critical, and you need to be seen.
Well,
people are very worried about this.
I did actually suggest to a daughter the other day who was talking to me about her elderly mum who did need to be in hospital. She said, "Shall I call an ambulance?" I said, "Can you put her in an Uber?"
100%. And I was about to make that point. If you're in the country, you won't see an ambulance. The ambulance will not get to you for well over an hour, 2 hours as a result. So it's much easier to get someone in a car. What sort of country are we living in?
I know.
I think there's a real fear as well. People are now saying that in Britain, our mortality rate could soar even higher, and that will really drop down the World League table. And there's a real fear that I think, as you say, that figure, not entirely sure where that figure's coming from the Royal College of Medicine, about that 2,000 deaths a month. But just anecdotally, people know probably that people are dying who could have been saved because they're not getting treated quickly enough.
Just looking at that figure, they say it's the preventable mortality really running about 500 deaths a week. That's what they're saying.
Yeah, that's massive, isn't it? But of course, some of that is COVID knock-on, where people are presenting to A&E, and I know this from my colleagues in A&E, with much more advanced disease than they would have done had they presented 18 months.
Why? Because they couldn't get in before.
And they didn't. People stayed at home, they couldn't get in.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? And there's an awful lot in the papers about this. The Telegraph does a very good job here. But clearly, I've never heard anyone like Dr. Adrian Boyle say anything quite like that.
It's stunning, isn't it? And I think there's also the fear that with the nurses' strike coming out for a couple of days and all the other strikes and just the sort of inability of people to get sort of cancer care treatment and scans and things like this, that the real fear is this can only get worse. So sometimes in the Sunday papers, you see stories and you think, oh, they're just saying that because they want a bit more money or they just want to speed things up. It's not as bad as it sounds. But just talking to people, everybody knows that it really is as bad as it sounds. And as you make the point, David, about ambulances, it's even if you get an ambulance, will you be able to be discharged when you get outside the hospital? And the answer is often no. So it's a terribly bleak situation, and I know it worries an awful lot of people.
It really does, and we had calls yesterday from people saying they're so worried now about going to hospital. And so actually that's another reason to take them in the car, because at least they're seen. Whereas if you're in the back of an ambulance, you're sitting on the ramp waiting to be seen for many hours. And then, of course, we can't liberate the ambulance. So, therefore, all of these ambulances are stuck. I remember working at Ealing many years ago, and we had that problem.
Romford, we had the same problem. Although I had a bizarre situation last night where one of my mum's neighbours needed an ambulance, and there was an ambulance and 3 cars, and they were there for at least an hour. Now, why do 3 cars need to be there? Isn't that bizarre? That's in London.
I can't answer that.
No.
No.
And it was bizarre, and that was all I was thinking about. What's going on here? Is it, again, a poor efficiency? I don't think it is in the main. I think mainly it's the problems that we have in hospitals and at the other end. But we need to look every area, at every area in the NHS and see what efficiencies.
I mean, it's extraordinary. Yesterday we interviewed one of the union leaders from the nurses unions who was saying that it's because of chronic underfunding into the NHS, and I kept having to say that is simply not true. It is not true. But clearly, what we're doing is we're now funding the NHS to extraordinary levels. We've never given it so much money, and the outcomes have never been so poor.
Yeah. I mean, we do have half the beds that we had.
Well, we had 300,000, we're down to 140,000.
However, we still would need the staff to actually staff those beds. So
Indeed.
even if we magic those up overnight.
And so weirdly, I was thinking about this last night. How many staff are actually spending time trying to find beds, with their clipboards and working out where the beds are? Whereas actually, if there were the beds, they wouldn't be spending the time doing that. They could do some clinical work.
Yeah, it's another area.
Weirdly, that was my thought as I went to sleep last night. I have a very odd life. But, I mean, anything in the paper then to suggest he's obviously issuing a warning, but there isn't much we can do about it.
Not really. He's just sounding the alarm bells and just effectively saying need more funds. But it's also about looking at the whole system, isn't it? And you know better than me, obviously, things about bigger role for pharmacists and more preventative treatment and all those sort of things about just trying to get people fitter and seen at earlier stages and just get the GP surgeries working, perhaps by lifting that rule on pensions where GPs can only get a certain amount of money in their pension fund.
All
It's
doctors,
not worth it. So
not just GPs.
all doctors, yes.
All doctors. And that's why we're seeing so many consultants retiring.
Yes, exactly. And you just need to look across the whole system and just find ways of making it better, because at the moment it's a really, really bleak outlook. And as you said, on beds, we're well down the sort of European League tables for sort of beds per head and things like that. So it just needs a wholesale reform, doesn't it?
Yes.
But it doesn't help when you've got a government that keeps changing its personnel every 5 minutes and just can't get a grip of
That's a brilliant point. And also, you see, there is still there could be a reserve medical army. We've talked about this a great deal. There are something like 10 to 50,000 retired doctors in this country. Now, you could lure them back with a cash incentive or indeed making life better in some way. And many of those doctors would come back. Now, they may need upskilling, but they are there. They're medically trained.
That's right, and I think also there's been some speculation about using the army medics as well, and we could see that.
That's not a stupid idea.
Yeah.
Let's move on, shall we, and talk about your second paper. This is an extraordinary story about Manston. This is the Migrant Facility Centre and outbreaks of disease.
Well, this is incredible, as you say. I mean, it's the Sunday Times second story, and it's talking about failures at Manston, the detention, the sort of processing centre for migrants in Kent, has led to migrants with diphtheria moved all around the country. And we did know about one case where apparently someone had died, but the Sunday Times is reporting that more than 70 suspected cases of diphtheria have been seen among those who have been moved from the facility in recent weeks. And in 2020, there was just one confirmed case. Sunday Times goes on to say it's highly contagious and that it's deadly in 5 to 10% of cases. So it's a real worry, because if these cases, as we know, people who cross in boats are being dispersed around the country, if then diseases are being dispersed around the country, that's very threatening. So I don't know, you'll know more than me about this, but how contagious diphtheria is, but I find that a very alarming and worrying story.
So,
Doctor?
I think what's very interesting about this is that sadly the man that died was ill when he got here.
And he wasn't checked.
And he wasn't checked. So he arrived with diphtheria into a camp with 2,500 people into it. So yes, there probably are 70 and more now who have it. It is very contagious, and I think those figures are about 5 to 10% death rates. Now, in the UK, if everybody's had their routine vaccinations, they should be vaccinated against diphtheria because it's part of the childhood vaccination. So then they shouldn't worry about it. But it is worrying because A, not everybody is vaccinated, not everybody has to be vaccinated, and we don't know A, what these people are coming in with, or B, what they're then being dispersed with.
So I was really shocked by this. I assumed every single one would have a medical.
Apparently not.
Wouldn't you think that's good?
Yeah, I mean, they could come in with other
medicine.
things. They could come in with very infectious, strains of, Ebola or whatever else. There could be all sorts of things.
Plus, of course, that base was massively overcrowded. I think there were 4,500 people in there for a base designed for about 1,600 people.
And infectious diseases love that. Yes. And of course, you see, really, in fact, we're just mirroring what we did with COVID. So we discharged people into care homes with COVID. Now we're discharging people who have been in Manston around the country with all sorts of things.
It does beg the question, doesn't it? What kind of conditions are they living in Calais before they come over?
That's a very good point.
They must be filthy and horrible there too.
Which we know they are.
Yeah. with diphtheria.
I mean, it's extraordinary, and I'd like to see what the response is. Is there anything in there to say what the response from government is?
Not really. I mean, the government is just saying it's doing its best to sort of speed up things. Of course, this is, again, will be another greater pressure on Sola Bravo, and the Home Secretary's already been under fire for her handling of the situation there, because the claim is that her predecessors, Grant Shapps and Priti Patel, did get people out of that processing centre quickly and into hotels, and that then failed under Sola Bravo.
So let me just ask you a question. Could we declare a state of national emergency? We're importing infectious diseases into this country because of a swathe of migrants that should not be in this country. And if we do that, then we have the powers to turn those boats back.
That's a very interesting point. I don't know enough about the technical reasons and the government laws whether you could do that, but it seems to me that just pure common sense should surely be that everybody who's coming in that circumstance should get a medical screening, if not only for their own benefit, for everybody else's benefit.
Yeah, I mean, it's extraordinary. I mean, the logistics are enormous, of course, because if you're talking about 40,000 and we've got 120,000 backlog, it's very difficult to do 160,000 medicals.
And who's going to do that?
And who's doing that? Because they're all busy in the hospital.
Well, that's right. It comes on the back of the earlier story we did about there's nobody to...
Now, I'm really pleased about the next story you've picked, because I find this absolutely fascinating. A massive U-turn going on about wind farms onshore.
That's right. This is the Sunday Telegraph story on their front page, and it's saying that Michael Gove has told allies that he will support ending the ban on onshore wind farms, which would lead to a cabinet split over the issue, because there are many people in the Conservative Party who are against the idea. But the Levelling Up Secretary, Michael Gove, is understood to be joined by Grant Shapps, the Business Secretary, and various others.
Graham Stewart as well.
Graham Stewart saying that they will rebel against this.
And Boris Johnson and Liz Truss.
Exactly. So two former Prime Ministers.
Yeah.
So, and saying that they now support this. Now, in many ways, it makes sense, because we know we're facing an energy security supply crisis. There are rumours that we could be having sort of scheduled power cuts potentially in January. So that is a very big fear. And onshore wind farms would be one way around doing that. Now, it would create a huge storm, if you excuse the pun, in the Conservative Party if it goes ahead. But one of the reasons, there's an MP who's standing down, Chris Skidmore, who's one of those who's very favour of net zero. And
not only that, he's the net zero czar, isn't he?
Absolutely. And he's saying, I feel that we need to look at every opportunity to investigate renewables and clean technology. So there is a sort of element of the Conservative Party that's saying, let's get on and let's reverse the ban on onshore wind, but many people are against it. Personally, I have to say, when I drive down to Cornwall, I find them sort of rather majestic, and I quite like them. So I'm in a sort of one of those people who like them, and I like the idea of having security supply. I don't live next to them. But then again, they tend to be on hilltops, so not many other people live next to them either.
I mean, I drive up to my son in Northampton. They're not on hilltops, I can promise you. They're in fields next to the motorway.
But you see, so therefore, I mean, I'm not averse to it if you allow communities to have consent over it. So if you, as a village, say, decide that you want one big turbine somewhere that you can use as your communal electricity supplier, I don't have a problem with it. But then what happens if you have a field, for example? Can you then put a windmill on it and then other people object? I don't know how it's going to work.
But there are other things. So firstly, they are really bad for the environment in terms of wildlife and birds, really bad. They kill many, many more birds.
They cost a lot to make.
They cost a lot to make, and they actually they don't have a forever life.
20 years.
So 20 years, we have all this scrap metal machinery. They are actually not that economically good for the environment. It might sound like a good idea, let's use wind to make energy, but if you dig below the surface, there's a lot of bad about wind.
I think the thing is, though, we just have to look at other solutions, and the trouble is with this country in terms of development anyway, whether it's a railway line or badly needed new homes, is people are always against development in their local area.
Well, that's
sometimes you just have to
that's very true, but also actually we need a bigger conversation. That's why I'm asking the question this morning about, do we actually believe in net zero? You know, did we have a referendum? Who actually voted for this stuff? Because I didn't.
And do we know how much it's going to cost every single individual in this country? Because that's what I don't think people do know. And would they want it so badly if they knew how much it was going to actually cost them?
Yeah, exactly. Let's move on now to The Sun. This is a great story.
Well, I find this fascinating. This is page 2 of The Sun.
In fact, I've had a message already from Tony about this, but carry on, I'll read that in a minute.
Well, to set it up, it's basically Nigel Farage, it says, according to The Sun on Sunday, is plotting a comeback with Red Wall Tories. And it's saying Nigel Farage has held secret meetings with disgruntled Red Wall Tories as he plots a political comeback. The Brexit maestro has been testing the water with Northern MPs who are unhappy with Rishi Sunak's leadership. We should say this comes in the context of about 10 Conservative MPs now who've already announced, a lot of them young in their sort of 30s and 40s, saying they won't stand again. Now, we know the polls are very bad. Looks like the Conservatives won't do very well. They could lose their seats anyway. But you've got the context of bad polling, lots of Conservatives already saying they're standing down, and now, of course, the comeback kid of all of them, really, you've got Nigel Farage saying, I'm going to come back, and I'm talking to those Red Wall Tories. And there are rumours as well in the Mail on Sunday of forming a separate party. And of course, as you know well, that Reform UK is already there. So there's a discussion about whether it's about a Reform UK uplift or whether it's a whole new party. There seems to be some dispute in the Sunday papers about who that is.
I'm just being really... Yeah, you have a conversation. I'm staying very quiet.
I think this is really interesting. I think there are lots of things going on. There's this whole net zero thing, which I think does need dialogue. But I think there's also the whole Brexit and the way that the Tory party is looking at the moment, where the only remaining Brexit people in there are being targeted and ousted if possible. I think there probably is a big appetite in the country for someone like Nigel to stand up and say, no, we fought for this, we got it, now we want it.
I'm sure I think there definitely is. I think one of the problems when it comes to an election is this is terrifying for the Conservative Party because they would see Nigel Farage as, if he stands against them in certain areas, or the Reform Party does, taking votes away from them that get Labour through the middle. And in the same way, Labour are worried about a resurgent Liberal Democrat Party or the Greens, who in places like Somerset, you only need the Greens or the Lib Dems to do well, and that would stop Labour taking Conservative seats.
What is interesting about the Brexit Party was the voters for the Brexit Party didn't come necessarily from the Conservative Party. They came from the Labour Party and the Conservative Party. These are hard-working British people who were sick and tired of being told what to do by Europe. Now, the thing that upsets me is when people say, well, Brexit has been a failure. My Twitter account, by the way, is like full of people who say that. But the point is, we haven't actually Brexited properly. No. We have none of the advantages yet that we could have. Certainly, we could have a low-tax economy. We don't have that. We've annexed Northern Ireland, for example. That's an absolute travesty. I'd be livid if I lived in Northern Ireland. And so, actually, I am being quiet because possibly I know a little too much. But this is very interesting for lots of reasons. You've got disaffected Tory MPs, particularly Tory MPs, who know if you've got a majority of, say, 5,000, you are not getting in.
I think if you've got a majority of 20,000, you're probably not getting in.
Matt Hancock, you see, Will Wragg, Chloe Smith, all of these members of Parliament who are standing down. You have to ask yourself, why in the prime of your life are you standing down in a supposedly safe Tory seat? Well, the answer is, it's not safe.
Yeah, none of the states.
Absolutely right. They've done the maths. They've looked at it. Now, of course, there's a huge gap in the poll at the moment between Labour and the Conservatives. That'll probably narrow quite significantly. The next election is still a couple of years away. But clearly, these people don't think it will narrow enough for them to be in safe seats. And that's why they're already announcing they're standing down. Because it's a lot easier to get a job now if you're a departing Conservative MP and take a few consultancies than when you lose 80 or 100 seats, as you rightly say.
Can you tell me very quickly in one line about I'm a Celeb Jill? Millions in the Mirror?
Yeah, the front page of the Mirror is saying that Jill Scott is set to make millions. They think she's going to win. There are 3 left. It's the final tonight. I'm not sure she will. Matt Hancock is one of the last 3 still in there. So
feeling a bit queasy.
It is possible he could win, although all the bookies' money seems to be on Jill Scott, the former footballer, to win.
Very good, Vincent. I'm amazed you're so up with it.
I hope she does. I mean, I don't watch it, but I hope
we don't want Matt Hancock, do we?
No.
It's amazing he's got this far, isn't it? He got into the last 3. You wouldn't have thought that a couple of weeks ago, would you?
No, it's extraordinary, isn't it? Wow.
Well, I wanted him to be kept into the end because I wanted him to earn every single penny of his fee, not get chucked out in a week and go home still with the same check. Yeah, eat a lot of spiders.
And he may well be another ex-Conservative MP because his constituency don't want him to stick around, do they?
No, they don't. And he's got a good majority, a very strong majority, or he did have. Let's see what happens. I shouldn't laugh. Right, thank you very much indeed, Vincent. Very good to see you. Thank you very much indeed. After the break, we'll be taking your calls, your thoughts and your messages. This is Talk TV broadcasting live from the Talk Radio studios.